children here in your childcare?
Which childcare name is a lot of
Minnesota Childcare right here. It's from the state of Minnesota's website. We're just wondering where the children are.
Where the children are?
Yeah, where are the children? It says you have 102 children here, and you got $2.66 million this year in funding.
Where are the children at? No children inside of this daycare center. And look at this daycare center right here, no children inside of this daycare center. But between those buildings, over $2.6 million.
Well, I hope everyone had a Merry Christmas besides Tim Walz and everyone engaged in his criminal enterprise, because as you know, we've spent about the past month or so extensively documenting the Democrat-backed Somali welfare fraud machine operating in Minnesota and exactly how it all works. But if you were at all skeptical of some of the stories we've been trying to tell you, thinking to yourself, there's no way that could be real, it could not possibly be that obvious. Well, independent journalist Nick Shirley, who's a great guy you should definitely go follow, recently did a fantastic expose on the situation by doing something so simple. Going on the ground in Minnesota and visiting many of the businesses that are widely being accused of fraud and money laundering and seeing what was going on there. And the results were exactly identical to some of the past stories we've already told you about. You first and foremost have the fact that anytime anyone shows up here to ask what is going on, the people immediately get aggressive and hostile. They don't want to talk, and sure, you could say, well, you're a random person showing up to a private business. However, I would point out that there might be a more specific reason they don't want to be televised or put on the internet, and that is because of the fact that just days after the Nick Shirley expose, we have indeed seen FBI agents now raiding some of these likely Somali front businesses. But even on the specifics, I mean, it just, again, matches the themes here so accurately. You have, as one example, a tiny little office space that allegedly has 15 to 17 different healthcare companies all registered to the same address, conveniently all nonprofit type of healthcare that is receiving government funding and Medicaid. And it's like, gee, I really wonder what's going on there, given the fact that we've already seen indictments handed down on Somali-ran healthcare nonprofits, quote unquote, like this. We have daycare centers for children also receiving government funding once again that Nick Shirley shows up to. And first of all, curiously, on a weekday, there's not actually any children in the preschool / early education center. And secondly, if you could not make it any more obvious, even the word learning on the sign that says learning center is spelled incorrectly. And so, you know, as we've often brought up about the theme of some of these likely and alleged fraudsters, it so often has been the case that, you know, you're dealing with people that, if they are up to no good, do not seem to be exactly all that creative or smart of criminals, right? In every single one of these stories you hear, it's like, oh, it's very clear what they were up to, right? And yet for years, as I've so often mentioned, this allegedly went just unknown by Tim Walz and the Democrat-ran state government. I once again look at videos like this and say, there's no way that could be true. As we often know about wide-scale mafia or money laundering operations, no, it's usually the case that local authorities can tell what is going on. They're absolutely aware. It's simply the fact they're either allowing it to happen, or more likely in the case of the Minnesota Democrat State Party, which is widely wrought with corruption, are likely in on it. But if you still don't believe us, let us bring you what apparently Nick Shirley found here today, because some of these videos are just absolutely fantastic in all the wrong ways. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. We greatly appreciate the support. And again, I say, if you are still kind of skeptical as to the situation we've been describing, oh no, surely that must all be right-wing propaganda, okay? Well, let's take a look at this quality leering center, allegedly a preschool in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and, well, what's going on there?
Here in Minnesota, massive fraud is taking place within the government and the Somali population. Here, this building alone, Quality Learning Center, is a daycare, yet they spelled learning wrong, and they said leering. This daycare alone in 2025 has received $1.9 million from the government. And the strange things about these childcare centers is there's no one here right now. It's midday on a weekday, and if you were to try to go inside, it's completely closed and the windows are all blacked out. No one's working, midday, children should be in here, and this place is licensed for 99 children, and this is the outside. There's no windows, no nothing, and like I said, they literally spelt the word wrong on their sign. This is open and blatant fraud taking place here inside of Minnesota. The government is complicit with this, and this is just one of the hundreds of child daycare centers here inside of Minneapolis being ran by the Somali population. It's sad that it's happening here in Minnesota, and it stinks that it's happening and it's being labeled on the Somali population. However, that's just the facts of what's happening here inside of Minnesota. $1.9 million for this daycare center that can't even spell learning right.
You cannot make that up. They can't even spell learning correctly. Or is that how it's pronounced in Somalian? I don't know. You tell me. Now look, to be clear before they try to sue me, I am not the judge. I'm not the court of law. I'm not even a police officer. And so I'm not necessarily trying to accuse this business of any wrongdoing. That's the job of investigators to prove. What I will say, however, is if we are to follow the pattern that already has been proven in court across the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, that this seems to raise all the red flags of what we would hypothetically call a front business, which in money laundering is referring to a company, a restaurant, in this case a nonprofit, that allegedly is set up for tax purposes to look like a legitimate business, but in reality, they're either just defrauding the government or using it as a pass-through entity in order to send criminal money through kind of like legitimate legal means, whatever it is. And in this case, you know, this is not an issue where the Chinese restaurant or something has like a backroom poker table, but it actually is still a restaurant, right? Again, like they don't exactly try to hide what they allegedly here might be up to. You don't even spell learning correctly. I mean, this building doesn't exactly look like what I would associate with a preschool, but okay, fine. And then there's no children inside, right? If you're going to be committing fraud, allegedly, at least kind of run a daycare, right? At least have a couple of children in there before you ask the government for millions of dollars. But I will repeat here, there does seem to be this attitude that, hey, this is very easy to do. Likely these alleged fraudsters believe they can get away with it. That's why they don't even necessarily try to hide their tracks, which I continue to say I believe is a strong indictment on Tim Walz and the actual Democrat state government as to why exactly their anti-fraud prevention measures have been so loose. Why is it that some of the very Somali businesses who got caught engaging in the fraud were bribing the campaign of people like Democrat Attorney General of the state, Keith Ellison? Gee, I don't know. But if you're still kind of skeptical as to what we're talking about here, take a look at what happens when Nick Shirley and friends here actually go into one of these alleged daycares for children. It's a pretty interesting scene in there, I gotta say.
Children here in your childcare?
Which childcare name is a lot of
Minnesota Childcare right here. It's from the state of Minnesota's website. We're just wondering where the children are.
Where the children are?
Yeah, where are the children? It says you have 102 children here,
Okay.
and you got $2.66 million this year in funding, and $2.5 million last year. We're just wondering where the kids are.
And who are you?
My name's Nick Shirley.
Nick Shirley.
And where are you? Which department? That is harassment.
Oh, we are from ourselves.
Yeah.
Hello, we'd like to ask where the money's going. Look at that. Shut us down. Where are the children at? No children inside of this daycare center. And look at this daycare center right here. No children inside of this daycare center. But between those buildings, over $2.6 million.
Yeah, well, very simple questions here, guys. Ironically, it's something that even a child could figure out. If it's a daycare for children, then where are the children? And if there's no children in the daycare, then why is it operating, and why is the government giving millions of dollars for quote-unquote childcare that actually is not happening? Of course, you could try to reasonably make the counter-argument that, well, why is a daycare obligated to let in a random person who wants to see the kids? I mean, maybe that was phrased poorly. Maybe they thought the guy was some type of predator. You know, that's certainly the excuse made by leftists like Hassan Piker. I'm a Hassan Piker. I shuck out the dog and go to a China. Is that, well, the daycare is not going to let you in anyway, even if it was legitimate. However, even if you want to make that point, okay, let's move on from the whole daycare situation then. And look now to the so-called Somali healthcare companies, because in this situation, Nick Shirley does something that is completely legitimate. And if we're an actual business, absolutely, this is something, a question that they should be ready to answer. He goes in there asking for rates. After all, if you're a healthcare company, then can I get coverage, right? Can I get healthcare? And again, I say the response here is very telling. They actually threatened to call the cops. This quote-unquote healthcare company threatens to call the cops on a potential customer who's simply asking for their business. Totally legitimate business, though, by the way.
A list of all of the healthcare companies. Loads of them right here. We want healthcare.
No, it's okay.
Yes, we'd like to speak about getting healthcare here.
No.
Why can't I get healthcare here?
No, wait.
Warning, you are under video surveillance. No trespassing, security, armed. This is the strangest place I've ever been to get healthcare. Just a bunch of different places. Healthcare here, healthcare right here. Another healthcare company right here. There are 3 healthcare companies inside of this building right here in this room of 7C. Now we have another Helping Hands.
And that, by the way, is something we talked about, and even there's, again, been indictments brought forth on fraudsters like this, right? You register a bunch of places very lazily to the same address. No one's there. And then, okay, let's say, for instance, we don't do in-person registration. You have to call, you have to go online. Okay. But if these are legitimate businesses, that's not even explained. They're like, no. Go away from our health insurance place for asking for health insurance. It's so straightforward, right?
C. Now we have another Helping Hands, Home Care LLC, another healthcare company. Present Help right here. We're looking for the best rates of healthcare here inside this building because we have so many options. Who can we talk to about getting the best healthcare?
I don't know.
No?
Sorry.
All right.
You don't know in the building that has all the healthcare companies who you can talk to about coverage rates for healthcare? And notice how no one here basically wants to speak. That's very strange, right?
We will not get any healthcare here. David, this is one of the stranger places I've ever been. Literally, healthcare every door you go to, yet nobody will give you a rate. How much money do you think's been funneled through this building?
Every year, I would say 50 to 60 million at least.
And finally, we were accepted into one of the daycare centers and they actually took down our information to give us a rate. However, when we left, we were then met with the police.
We received a complaint that gentleman matching your description were in this building harassing the individuals who stay here.
Oh, we're checking out the rates for healthcare. Because there's 14 healthcare companies inside this building, so.
Okay.
Well, that's not what he said. He said there's 14 companies here, and he's trying to assume because they're Somali providers, everyone here is fraudulent.
Okay.
So
He's here with some kind of like propaganda.
no, we're just checking.
You did a great job disproving it, didn't you? I mean, like, all but one of the companies he went to, no, there's nothing going, there's no healthcare here. I mean, yeah, you fantastic job.
No, this is a area that we're allowed to enforce trespassing ordinance. Is there any other reason that you guys are here?
Well, we were checking rates.
No, he's not.
We were checking rates. We asked for rates.
No, you're not.
Okay. I'm gonna have, if you guys are all good, we're gonna step outside and we can continue this conversation.
All right, let's leave. So, all right, we're getting escorted out right now. The police have arrived. We were checking out the rates, seeing what was happening inside this building. No one would really speak with us. We did go inside the one daycare center, and she actually did give us rates for childcare. Much respect to that lady. What's the problem, officer?
Oh, so correction, it wasn't even healthcare, it was actually childcare. Okay.
Well, so again, we've been getting reports from multiple individuals that you guys were harassing individuals who work here. At the end of the day, this is private property, and it's one that people are allowed to ask you to leave, and it's also one the Minneapolis Police Department is allowed to enforce trespassing ordinance at this address.
Yeah.
So
As we got escorted out of this building, the Somalis filmed us as we left, and we headed over to the next building that had 22 of the same home health care providers operating from inside of the building.
Right here you have.
Filmed for doing what? What are they angry about? He went to, this is how, like, the United States of America works and capitalism is supposed to work. If you go to somewhere that provides a certain service and ask for that service, you're supposed to be at least given or offered the service you're asking for, okay? You know, it's not illegal to show up to a place that states it's about healthcare and ask for healthcare. Now, I understand if you come from a country where there basically is no functional economy, there I said it, and the only form of capitalism you practice is piracy and terrorism, then sure, I guess it would be confusing, right? I'm gonna get in trouble. But no, it's true, right? It would be confusing for a legitimate customer who's actually not engaged in some type of theft or wrongdoing to actually show up and ask. But I guess that's too much to ask. You know, that's too much assimilation. Apparently, these healthcare providers can't handle it. Gee, I don't know. But anyways, take a listen to this clip right here. I think it's a great explanation of exactly how the machine operates. And I have a very pertinent point about that to make in a second. But first, here's what's going on.
How deep is this fraud here inside of Minnesota?
It is far worse than anybody can imagine. You heard it's 7 to 10 billion and maybe more, and now the numbers have been revised and put out there publicly that they think it's more like 8 billion. How I got involved is that where my office is here in Minneapolis, I'm sort of in the heart of all of this fraud, and I would see these childcare centers. I said, well, there aren't any kids there. It's the middle of the day. And all I see are a couple of guys standing out front smoking. And then I'd go by another daycare and I'd see the same thing. I said, well, where do these kids play? And so I started to go online and look, and I said, this place is licensed for 80 children. They had 0 children. Every time I went by there, they never had a single child there. Then I started to see all these transportation companies going around, and it was always a Somali driver. And I said, well, that's great. They're out there transportation, contributing, but they never had a passenger, never, ever once. And I said, well, what is all this transportation? What are they doing? So then I found out that in Minnesota, they have something called non-emergency medical transportation. So this is going to the dentist's office, therapy, whatever it might be. And I said, well, how many of these companies are there? And the research came back that there are 1,020 of them, and more than 800 of them are Somali-owned. Nobody from the state of Minnesota ever cross-checks to see if any rides were ever actually provided. All they did was write the check.
Yeah, so in other words, this stuff is happening everywhere in broad daylight, and very conveniently in the name of woke politics or liberalism or anti-racism. It seems like time and time again, the Democrat Party of Minnesota, totally not a criminal organization, by the way, keeps on setting in place very loose anti-fraud measures, that, especially pertaining to the Somali community, that keep on allowing this to happen. And I'm sure by now, if you've been following this story closely, you're noticing a lot of different patterns, right? It seems like it's watching deja vu, the same thing happen over and over again. Usually it's the same exact criminal business scheme that they try to set up. But I also hope maybe you're starting to realize that the very nonprofit purposes that oftentimes these Somali fraudsters are pushing are also the same exact things that Tim Walz and, largely speaking, the Democrat Party are always bragging about. What do I mean by that? Well, very often, what sectors are these nonprofits operating in? Healthcare, childcare, those two, right? You've heard about that a lot. What have you also heard about a lot? Oh, the Democrat Party's rhetoric. We're the party of healthcare. We're the party of childcare. No, you're not. You're the party of crime. And it's very convenient that your quote unquote political ideology so often seems to be correlated with the very money laundering you're allowing, right? As I've been trying to tell people for several weeks about this stuff, woke politics really is a very convenient excuse for financial crime when you really break it down. And even some of the other ones we've heard about, right? Feeding children, that's the famous Somali fraud indictment, I should say, from Minnesota, where they pretended to be giving out free meals to kids when they weren't. Hey, what did we hear a lot of from Tim Walz on the campaign trail as well? Free school lunch, you know, that's his whole thing. He believes in feeding children. Oh, conveniently, that's another big Somali fraud operating in the state, isn't it? And then lastly, housing. I mean, do I even have to start there? So just something I'd like to point out, right? Even in the VP debate last year, what was Tim Walz saying about childcare? Let's flash back to that.
We in Minnesota passed a paid family medical leave. You have a child, you and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start. The family works better. We stay in their employers. We get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota, and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business and then to make sure that folks are able to pay for that. We were able to do it in Minnesota, and I'm still telling you this. We were listed as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A federal program of paid family and medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Yeah, you're real proud of that one, aren't you, Tim Walz? Your child care. You did such a great job on it. And according to him, is also the national stance of the entire Democrat Party, right? They want to copy the supposedly thriving and amazing Minnesota policy specifically towards childcare, although that really should not be all that surprising because, you know, when you actually break down liberal politics, this is a common theme. They'll get out there in the name of their hippie liberalism, whatever, and call for more government funding toward a certain issue. In this case, more funding for childcare. And for a very long time, I think conservatives were basically arguing against a straw man because we would return and say, well, you know, government ran projects are not as good because they're not as efficient. There's too much bureaucracy and regulation. The private sector does it better. But no, in reality, it was never about that, right? It's not that, oh, we're these big-hearted liberals who care about healthcare and children. We think the government should offer a bigger helping hand to people. That's all bogus. The real reason, right, that Democrat politicians believe in these types of things, as you can see, is so that way they can funnel money to these fake charities that in reality, it's all just one big money laundering scheme. And Minnesota and Tim Walz are far from alone in this matter. You know, you see the same thing in California. Hey, where'd all the homelessness money go, by the way? Gavin Newsom. Oh, we're going to fix homelessness. We're amazing liberals. Oh, no. The money just disappeared. Huh, that's interesting. High-speed rail, same question. Liberals believe in infrastructure. You know, those conservatives don't want government projects. We do. Oh, where'd all the money go for that government project, right? Is that about quote-unquote big or small government? Or is that debate actually kind of irrelevant in the sense, no, you're just laundering the money, so it doesn't matter what the political ideology here is. You're just criminals who are laundering the money. I don't know. Just a point I'd like to raise about that. And by the way, again, I'll point out, it's not just the childcare thing with Tim Walz. It's also the free lunches. Oh, wait, feeding children. That's another Somali-related indictment. You know, healthcare. Oh, we've seen the same story there. Housing. All the things Tim Walz brags about constantly, and so do Democrats, yes, we've seen are all connected to this very fraud scheme ran by members of the Somali diaspora that, again, trust me, totally Tim Walz is not in on it. Yeah, sure. Really kind of a damning indictment, I think, broadly of the things Democrats try to tell you they're all about, and in reality, this is what it is. Now, of course, last point I would like to make is so often you will hear Gavin Newsom, Tim Walz, and others, right, these blue state governors, still turn around and say to the conservatives, okay, sure, we're allowing billions of dollars to be stolen from the state, but have you seen our GDP numbers, right? Tim Walz is always bragging, oh, well, we're an A-plus credit rated state, and so therefore, you know, I'm doing a great job on this issue. But in reality, first of all, you know, you did not build that, right? There's all these Democrat governors who say, oh, well, my state has the bigger GDP than yours. You know, California, New York. Yeah, they're the largest by population. And by the way, they've been like that for many decades, okay? So you didn't build any of that. The so-called economic and financial advantage that you're bragging about, you inherited and actually actively you're destroying. And that's exactly why I'd like to make this point right now about the overall declining Minnesota situation when it comes to the economy and their financial state, because indeed, this fraud is having a very real impact. So don't sit there and try to think to yourself, oh, well, you know, this is kind of a funny or crazy story, but how does it affect me as a taxpayer? It absolutely does.
6 out of 50. all across a backdrop of one of the highest overall tax rates in the country, the second highest actually, and the sixth highest income. And so when you look at how are we going to pay for all this, we have to start talking about how do we provide the inputs to the outputs, meaning a robust economy puts pay into the system that allows us to invest in our infrastructure and where appropriate social services and a safety net. But we've come from an $18 billion surplus in this biennium, looking forward 2 years to a $2 to $3 billion deficit. Someone's going to have to pay for that. And what I think about for our local folks is what are the trade-offs that are going to be made in the investments in infrastructure.
Yeah, so the numbers really do speak for themselves. Second highest tax rate in the country, and yet somehow they're operating at a huge budgetary deficit, and the state is running out of money to pay for basic things like actual public works and infrastructure that real, normal, non-criminal human beings genuinely need and pay taxes to receive. Well, gee, could that have any correlation to the fact that the state is allowing billions of dollars to be stolen from it by criminals? I don't know, just some speculation there. Hey, below average when it comes to GDP and job growth? Well, could that have something to do with the fact that there is actually not a lot of, first of all, legitimate business being operated in Minnesota? Because, I mean, we've shown you the quote-unquote business or thriving economy of Minneapolis here that Tim Walz tries to brag about. Yeah, it's not much of a big mystery, is it? Okay, 40th in labor force growth, right? The labor force is not growing a lot. Gee, you know, maybe that could have something to do with the fact that also in many communities that conveniently often tend to be heavy political machines and voter blocks for the Democrat Party, you have huge swaths of people, I wonder who I'm talking about here, that also heavily rely on government benefits and are oftentimes lying and defrauding that as well. Well, maybe that could have something to do with it, right? So now the good news here today is that according to Kash Patel, FBI agents have already been surging into Minneapolis to crack down on these fraudulent businesses. We've already seen a couple of those actually get physically raided. Although the bad news is that, first of all, this was long overdue. It should have been happening years ago because this stuff was pretty obvious. I mean, people on the ground clearly saw what's going on here, right? A bunch of daycares, not just one. It's not, oh, we're picking on this one random person. No, a bunch of daycares where no one's working, a bunch of transportation service with no one inside it, right? Classic money laundering. So that's number one. But secondly, the regret is, of course, FBI agents are yet to be spotted at the houses of Tim Walz and Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. But I guess all in due time. I don't know. But that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on this whole broad picture situation in the comment section down below. Are you surprised? Does it vindicate everything that, you know, you were saying, we were saying, etc.? Let me know. Be sure, though, to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.